There are a lot of people that have a status quo bias or a positivity bias that doesn't want to look at negative things, or thinks that everything will be fine, or thinks that risks are always overblown or something like that. And they say something to the effect of, hey, look, we have thought the rapture was coming since the 16th century, that the end was nigh. And Y2K was a bunch of hype, and 2012 was a bunch of hype, and SARS and Ebola and those things were a bunch of hype. And yes, there's problems in the world, but they're less bad than they used to be. And they just drive innovation, and that's the curve. I think that this perspective is complete dangerous nonsense. And it is more of a bias response than it is actually a thoughtful response, because here are the factors I would like people to think about regarding the uniqueness of the time we're in now relative to all other times. And yet our intuition is conditioned, and even our reason is conditioned from past experience and past time. So we have to factor that. All of the previous civilizations and previous empires died at some point. They failed, and none of them were eternal civilizations. We don't still have a Byzantine or a Egyptian or Mayan or Aztec or Roman or whatever empire. They died for reasons associated with self-induced collapse. Oftentimes, they actually cut down all the trees and Easter Islanded themselves, or led to internal infighting that created dissent and collapse. But oftentimes, even if they were overtaken by external enemies, they were overtaken by enemies that were smaller than ones they had protected against previously, because they had underwent institutional decay. So far, nobody has figured out how to avoid institutional decay, especially as they scale long term. So we only know how to make civilizations that collapse. Various time frames. Democracies collapse on a 200 to 300 year time frame. The US is coming up on 250 years right now, and we're pretty near a collapse type scenario for a number of reasons. It's actually very interesting to think about the way that the US emerged as the superpower coming out of World War II, that it didn't enter World War II as, and the way that the European countries got radically downregulated in their relative dominance in the world via World War II. And how easily a situation like this could do the same thing, where China comes out of this the way the US came out of World War II. If you want a democracy or a republic to last longer than the amount of time they've ever lasted, you have to reboot them, because institutional decay does occur. So reboots are needed, which is a super important topic. But we only know how to make civilizations that collapse. But for the first time ever, we have a fully globalized civilization. So collapse means something it's never meant before. We have caused environmental damage locally that desertified the topsoil, and we couldn't feed the people, but we could never actually make the entire biosphere fucked up, right? We couldn't do species extinction at scale everywhere, or mess the entire oceans up, or things like that. We don't have a Chinese civilization and a US civilization, because if either of them fully failed, the other one would also fail, because of completely dependent interconnected supply chains and completely interdependent biosphere type dynamics. So we're facing a collapse of a civilization or an empire, but where the scale of it is unprecedented. The next part that is really critical to get is that we have used our power either directly, militarily, in ways that cause harm, or indirectly in ways that cause harm through social stratification, pollution, unrenewable resource, externalities of various kinds. But we never had tech where, even if we wanted to, we could fuck up everything at a global scale until World War II. That was the beginning of us having truly globally catastrophic technology. And the Romans couldn't fuck everything up if they wanted to at a global scale with the technology they had. So that's why the development of the bomb in World War II created the emergence of a world system that was completely focused on not using our new technology. And in the long arc of human history, World War II was like a second ago. And that was the beginning of us having truly globally catastrophic capabilities. So if you're using any forecasting from before that, it's nonsense in terms of what kind of harm we didn't do, because we also couldn't do. Okay. The only stuff that's relevant is what kind of harm could we do, and we did, right? So then factor the new capability. So World War II, the Bretton Woods world, we made the United Nations and we made the World Bank and we made the entire set of Bretton Woods agreements and all the whole world structure to make sure that we didn't use our new technology and that the superpowers didn't fight. But through the history of the world, major empires had always fought. So we needed to do something that we had never done. And we were able to do that because of a few things. We were able to create debt-based finance to be able to grow the economy rapidly. So there was so much abundance, we didn't have to have scarcity-based wars. But of course, debt-based finance is unsustainable. You can't do it forever because you can't run an exponential curve on a finite planet where there's actually materials economy that's involved forever, right? And so, but we could do it for some time. Also, at the time of the Bretton Woods solutions, we weren't near planetary boundaries anywhere. We didn't have climate change. We didn't have dead zones in oceans. We didn't have biodiversity loss. We didn't have peak phosphorus or Amazon threat or any of those things, right? And one catastrophic weapon that's very hard to make, it's very hard to enrich uranium. There's only a few places that even have uranium mines. Two superpowers that have it that can both spy on each other pretty perfectly. Mutually assured destruction is possible. But today we have dozens of catastrophic weapons, not one catastrophic weapon. We have many dozens of actors that have them, including non-state actors, and many of the technologies aren't hard to produce. We have much more systemic fragility. It's important to understand that when you make something very efficient, you also make it fragile. Right? If you're operating your ICU very efficiently, it can't handle spikes. If you're operating your infrastructure efficiently, it can't handle spikes. If you have a supply chain that's very efficient and you get collapse anywhere, you can get cascading collapse. If you have lots of interacting dynamics where a drought somewhere leads to people having to move to already resource scarce areas that leads to war and escalating war on already existing political tensions where larger weapons happen. Those types of cascade and amplifier scenarios are also unique to this time in terms of their scale, their connectedness. And so we have an explosion of risk happening at this time. And also in terms of exponential technology curves. As we can see with coronavirus, we are not good at having an intuition for exponential curves. Our intuition has never really interacted with exponential curves very much, so we're not conditioned to even notice what they are. We're used to things that have more normal growth curves than that, so our intuition for timescales is quite bad. So the underlying biosphere, the underlying infrastructure, the underlying social tensions are getting more fragile. There's more interconnectivity for cascade failures, and our overall impact capability is increasing exponentially. And as we can see, our intelligent, coordinated responses are shitty. This is the underlying situation. We could have completely prevented this virus. Fortunately, the death percentage on this one is not that bad. So if we don't get our shit together, this will be terrible. But we can get our shit together for this and deal with it and use it to harden our capability to deal with catastrophic risks of all kinds and actually get much smarter about this issue. Because so as we're ramping our diagnostic capabilities and our response capabilities for this, we also want to be for the next round of mutation that could occur. And not just the next round of mutation for this coronavirus, but also whatever else comes next. We can see avian flus happening in factory farms around the world, so we want to be upregulated to pandemics, but we also want to be upregulated to all of the catastrophic risks. This one we were not prepared for, and now we're having to deal with it in real time. But had it been a Carrington event taking out the electrical grid, it would be so much more catastrophic. And so we can prepare for it, but we can't deal with it once it's happened. That's one of the key things. There's a lot of issues that once they've happened, that it's just really terrible, but preparing for it is doable. And so one of the lessons, hopefully, is there's a lot of shit that you just have to be prepared for ahead of time as opposed to deal with once it's occurred. This one is hopefully something that upregulates our response there and has us pay attention to systemic fragility and explosion of catastrophic risk and the inadequacy and atrophy of our overall governance systems, and that neither the government mechanisms nor the market mechanisms adequately dealt with this. So we need much better collective intelligence systems to be able to deal with risks than the current ones we have. So as we are upregulating our response to this, both the immediate and the second, third, fourth order effects, we want to also be not making things worse, like creating total monopolies by the way we wrongly engage the private sector, or whatever. And we want to make sure that we're setting up capacity to handle the next ones better.